Let's review the film today with Andrew Krammer. Now that we're all back on the same time zone, you're back from Europe, back from
Yep.
England, got probably a chance to hopefully sightsee a little bit, but also covered a pretty interesting football game on Sunday, did you not?
It was. They never make it boring, right? Right up
Never.
until
Never.
right up until the end. Yeah, it was an incredible game. The atmosphere, the Vikings fans who turned out, I'm always impressed. It was my first international game I got to cover, but even just seeing on TV the previous games, Vikings fans always show out, and they showed out well for this one too.
It could have been a long, expensive, fruitless trip for a lot of fans, Vikings team personnel. It was looking pretty bleak. They'd already lost to the Steelers 24-21. They're down 17-14. Had a chance to tie earlier in the fourth quarter, but it sure seems like Will Reichard's field goal probably hit something. And then you get to the point where it's kind of a gotta have it drive. And in that drive, you're also down Christian Darrisaw, who was on a snap count and wasn't playing. So you're down basically your only starting offensive lineman at that point is Will Fries. You've got backup tackles in both spots. You've got a rookie, Joe Huber, making his first start. You've got a converted guard playing center for the first time. Yet they're still able to move the ball down the field. Carson Wentz goes, I think, 9 of 9 for like 71, 72 yards. They score a touchdown. They win the game with 25 seconds left, so they are able to come home happy. I want to zero in on that drive at the beginning of the film review, Andrew, because it feels like that was kind of it's a gotta have it pivot point in the season, but also could be instructive for how things work going forward, no matter who is the quarterback is.
Yeah, and you're not always going to get defenses playing the way that the Browns did at the end of that game, like all defenses do. You know, when you can't give up a touchdown to lose, you're going to back up a little bit. But so there were some elements that the Vikings took advantage of on that drive, but everything that worked well for Carson Wentz and Kevin O'Connell, seemingly in the first three quarters of that game, came together on the last drive in terms of O'Connell calling up the right quick game plays. The last three plays of that drive are directly to Jordan Addison. One of them is just a jet sweep, sends Addison into the flat, gets the ball out quick. Boom, that's like 5 yards to Addison. The next play is a screen, the opposite direction to Addison. They got the screen game going in certain moments. The first pass play was a 9-yarder to Hawkinson on a slip screen past Myles Garrett that worked really well. So then the Addison play to the screen sets up then the touchdown, where it's just an anticipatory throw directly over a defender. Addison throws his hand up, puts the mailbox sign up, and Wentz answers it. And those are the kind of just quick read reaction plays where it wasn't like going through your progressions, number 1, number 2, 3, 4, get the ball out to the right guy. It was schemed plays that Wentz knew. He knew where to go with the ball before the snap and then executed it perfectly afterward. And then I thought the two biggest throws of that last drive were a 14-yarder to Hawkinson and then the 21-yarder to Jefferson that set up those three straight plays to Addison. The 14-yarder to Hawkinson, when you go back and watch it, it is basically immediate pressure right in Wentz's face. And he is checking down and kind of getting through whatever progression they needed to just to get to the check down as the pressure's coming free on a stunt past, I believe it would have been Blake Brandel or Will Fries in the interior. And that's the kind of play that is not being made by a quarterback who's looking downfield and not anticipating the pressure in front of him. So as good as they played up front, Wentz is still negating it or negating any kind of slip ups by the offensive line by just dumping that pass down to Hawkinson, who picks up 14 yards. And then the 21-yarder to Jefferson, similar deal. It was a twist that gets by another Browns twist that gets by, I think it would have been Brandel and the rookie guard Joe Huber. And he's able to just lob that thing up to Jefferson. Perfect touch pass. Jefferson skies up over Denzel Ward and gets it. These are the kind of plays that it requires not just the scheming that I talked about in the first couple of minutes here, but it requires the quarterback to read these things, anticipate, and get the ball out. And it's not just these easy, quick game screen setups. It was also Wentz kind of rising above the circumstances in front of him. It was impressive. And it's not like he did that all day. There were some third downs where he tucked and ran the ball and didn't need to. Some check downs that he missed based on how a really good defense was kind of baiting him into some things. So it wasn't perfect, but when they needed to kind of coalesce and get everything working together, like you said, 9 straight completions, 72 yards, and the game-winning touchdown.
Indeed, and that's interesting because, like I said, 4 backup offensive linemen in the game, and you don't know exactly how healthy those guys are going to be going forward. You might hope that an extra week gives Christian Darrisaw a longer runway. You might hope that someone like Brian O'Neill's got an extra week now. Maybe he's going to be back sooner rather than later. But like injuries have played enough of a role, and instability in the line in general has given you some pause. You already Brian Kelly's going to be an injured reserve for a while here. You don't know exactly when he's going to be coming back. You think you're going to get Donovan Jackson back. So next time you come back and play, you probably have a better, a fuller picture of your offensive line. That said, they're at a weird and interesting point, and we're going to diverge a little bit probably here from just the full film review. But like you're talking about some of the things Carson Wentz is doing. The numbers say he's been pretty average to maybe below average if you look at the advanced metrics, the total QBR, the Pro Football Focus player grades, but he has gone 2-1 in these 3 games. Yeah, his left shoulder is banged up, as Kevin O'Connell was quick to remind us of on Monday. But like Kevin O'Connell's also saying, hey, JJ McCarthy's had some time. He's learned a lot from watching the way Carson Wentz ran this offense. So I'm just kind of wondering like how things look different, how they might attack things differently, assuming that JJ McCarthy is healthy. They're giving him a long runway in this bye week. Like, what does it look like when he's back, which seems to me is trending towards the Eagles game, but I'm not sure about that.
Well, it's a great question, and none of us are sure at this point. If JJ McCarthy returns to practice, it's going to be up to Kevin O'Connell to decide if he's ready enough to start, knowing that Carson Wentz is kind of, not that he doesn't need the practice reps, of course he does, but he's kind of ready to jump in there if needed. He's shown you that at this point. So with McCarthy, it's about what he can handle, what they think he's good at. And they haven't had him on the field long enough this season to get much of those answers. And Kevin O'Connell said in London after the Browns game, he said, this was a lot from our coaching staff to empty the tank, throw every trick play, that the Cam Akers touchdown to Josh Oliver, all those things that we still need to kind of hammer down during this bye week and find out what exactly we're good at. What is our identity? And that's hard to figure out when you just mentioned all those moving parts on the offensive line. You mentioned the biggest moving part at quarterback and not knowing who's going to be that guy in there right out of the gate. They've probably got more answers of what they're good at with Carson Wentz right now. As much time as you had with JJ McCarthy in training camp, as much time as you had building the system you want to run with him, you only had 8 quarters of pretty mediocre, especially mediocre passing offense through those 2 games. With Wentz now, you've got 3 volumes of games that in production, much more production and more plays in those games to work off of. And frankly, what kind of patchwork O-line you're probably still going to have coming out of the bye, because Darrisaw doesn't look 100%, doesn't look near it. And then these other guys will be kind of hobbling back from whatever they're dealing with. So it's a great question, Mike, and nobody's going to have that answer for you right now of like what it's going to look like with McCarthy. But what they were good at on Sunday, at least against the Cleveland Browns, was the quick game stuff. They were really good at, and with Wentz, really good at being decisive and operating and putting the ball where it needed to be. And it creates quite the situation for O'Connell, who is obviously very good at coaching up this position and setting these guys up. But if it's not going to be Wentz, if you are going to make this switch to McCarthy, it's not going to look as clean, I wouldn't think, because it didn't in the first 2 games with him. I don't think you can anticipate him picking up where Carson Wentz left off with the rest of this offense. It's going to be more of a learning curve with figuring out both the quarterback, who's only 22 years old, and the coaching staff, who's just in their 3rd game with him ever. Wentz is farther along as a quarterback, both maturity-wise, in terms of his fundamentals, being just more of a steady presence in that spot, which is why we're talking about the production and the wins he's had versus going back to a young guy who is the future of this franchise. So they have a lot to weigh in this decision of how they go about it. And frankly, judging how McCarthy is ready through practices and seeing how he's ready. So last week, O'Connell talked very delicately about how they would ease McCarthy back in, getting into individual reps when he got back into practices, not necessarily team reps right away. If that's still the case, then this would seem to be still Carson Wentz's job, at least for the time being, as McCarthy eases back from that high ankle sprain.
Oh, and what's fascinating too is like if you give JJ McCarthy a similar game plan to the one they went with in Cleveland, or against Cleveland, he's probably not going to run it the same way Carson Wentz, because he just doesn't have the volume of experience. He might thrive in some of those quick reads because he can get the ball out. Like if he knows where to go with the ball, then his job becomes easier than reading and scanning the whole field, which a lot of it is what he was having to do those first 2 games. But do you also then sacrifice or short circuit some of his long-term development or his kind of upside by giving him more of a basic game plan? Do you know what I mean? Like, you want him ultimately to be a quarterback who is reading the whole field, going through his progressions. You don't want him just running a quick read and throw option kind of offense all the time. So I think there's that factor into it too. Like, you want to win games now, but you also want him to be the best version of himself 3 years from now. And if you don't let him fully be a quarterback, it's harder for him to do that.
Yeah, and I wouldn't necessarily equate a quick passing game with easier or simpler, because while it does get the ball out quickly, and yes, while you're not going through these full field reads all the time, that was basically predicated by their O line. And frankly, if JJ McCarthy's coming back to an offensive line that looks anything like what they put out there on Sunday, you probably should be doing the same things just to protect the quarterback, regardless, because you don't want him getting hit on 7-step drops and long developing plays and all these things. So I think they're going to have to, the opponent and their personnel in front of the quarterback are going to have to dictate what they're doing with the quarterback as much as anything, because they need to win games. It's all going to be all about that, right? So I see what you're saying big picture wise, but the week to week trenches that these guys are in, they're just going to be trying to dig out what offense they have that week to beat then the Philadelphia Eagles and what they think they're bad at defensively. And so all of this could force them into a system with JJ that looks more like what they had with Carson, because of the personnel that was in front of Carson that dictated it to begin with. And frankly, we could discuss, and I'm not the super expert to know this, but Carson might be better suited as a veteran and as a guy who ran the RPO systems in Philly and has a lot of experience doing this kind of stuff to do it right now than JJ is, which is the predicament that they might find themselves in development versus instant production with a veteran. And Carson might be limited as a guy. Like, you see some throws there and some windows against Cleveland that many quarterbacks might leave the meat on the bone, but there's times where he's not layering in throws or choosing to check down instead of kind of layering in some touch stuff deeper down the field, where you're like, you might want more from your quarterback in that instance. So it's not like the guy's a world beater, but he played some mistake-free football. You had 2 turnovers in that game that were both by your running backs, not by your quarterback. Carson didn't take a sack until his 21st drop back in the 3rd quarter of this game. It was a great game by Carson, the coaching staff, and everything. And that is what's going to set this up of like, okay, can JJ step in and run a similar system for them, knowing that this offense is probably not suited to run the run heavy play action, deep, kind of vaulted deep drop back stuff they've always wanted to do, because you can't necessarily you can't necessarily expect like your 8-man protections to hold up when you're starting Joe Huber at left guard.
Well, and we saw, like, when they got greedy in that game, it was one of those drives. I can't remember exactly which one it was, but they started off a drive with like a double move and try to pop a big play. That was one of the sacks, and all of a sudden you're in 2nd and 17. Like, you get behind the sticks quickly if you try to do too much with this offense. And we saw when McCarthy was in there, he was holding the ball for 3 seconds. Like, they were trying to make these big plays happen. And like, JJ McCarthy is very good on intermediate throws. I think that's probably his biggest strength to me so far, is what I've seen from him, is like, he can 15, 20 yards down the field. Like, he's very accurate. He's got a good arm. He can get the ball in there, but does he have enough time? Is the risk reward enough that you can run that offense right now? Can you do enough of what he does well right now based on what you have around him?
Yeah, and that's a great question, and they need to figure that out. And yeah, when we watched him in training camp and the very limited reps we've seen him, I would agree that it seems to be his arm speed and the velocity with which he puts on passes fits well into that intermediate window of, if he gets timing down with his receivers, they should be able to catch and run with it. That's the kind of stuff that they should be able to do pretty good with him. But when you see the quick game stuff, a lot of it's about touch and a lot of it's about reading things before the snap and knowing where to go and being confident in that decision. Those are the things that for a 22-year-old, I imagine 22-year-old is going to come in and go through a lot of growing pains with, where Carson seems to be a lot more clear-headed, much like Sam Darnold last year in a different way, because Sam obviously is more the downfield king right now of the NFL. But Carson's the guy who has more of that confidence and clarity, where JJ, through just his first 2 games, we did not see that confidence or clarity that if you're going to run quick game, if you're going to do the stuff that they did really well against Cleveland, it takes that kind of focus at quarterback that JJ seemed to just kind of have an extra hitch or two that threw the timing off of everything.
And that decisiveness and timing is the difference a lot of times between a 2-yard gain and an 8-yard gain, and that's all the difference in the world if you're trying to stay ahead of the game. Like if your quick game isn't run efficiently, it kind of ends up being like a negative run, or you're in 2nd and 9 even if you're passing the ball.
Yeah, and if you're hunting things too downfield, that's, if because there's certain moments where they've got built-in quick check down options for plays where they're sending 3 vertical routes. And there were times where Carson Wentz would try to hunt something. The couple of third downs that didn't work out, where he's tucking and running the ball when he should have been at least checking it down. There were moments where you could tell before the snap, he's trying to find on one of them, a Jalen Naylor corner route that Greg Newsome, a really good corner for the Browns, kind of baits him into it, where he sits down on Jefferson initially. He's watching Greg is the entire time. He's not watching the receivers. And when he sees Carson drop his eyes deep down the field, Greg backpedals. And instead of Carson adjusting to the adjustment, he just kind of tucks and hitches and then ends up trying to run and gets tackled. Whereas like the Tom Brady or whomever who's great at that position is going to then know, nope, I need to check it down to Jefferson after Newsome bails on it. Those are the kind of things that you're always going to see quarterbacks kind of, have issues with, and especially JJ McCarthy. Like that's the kind of thing that, like you said, if you want to, kind of pare it down to the quick game stuff, there are going to be levels built into every passing play that he still has to find a way to operate through.
I want to move on to the defense momentarily, but before we jump off of this discussion, like my gut says McCarthy starts against the Eagles. Is your gut different than that right now?
I have no idea. I don't feel comfortable guessing at this point, because
I can guess. I'm guessing McCarthy at this point
because Kevin O'Connell has kept a good, I don't want to say veil, but he's kept a good kind of just kind of shroud over what he wants to do. Yeah. He's kept his options open is the most honest way to say it, because he hasn't committed one way or the other. He said a few weeks ago, I don't have to answer the question of whether JJ is going to be the starter upon return when healthy. He's talked about easing McCarthy back into it in terms of practices. So we'll see. We'll see if they're confident in him right now, or if they want to, again, bring him along slow enough to then get his practice reps in. I think that's the biggest thing. They didn't put him on IR, not necessarily just because they didn't see it as a 4-week injury, but because they want to make sure that when he's able to practice, he can get back out there and do it. And if he were on IR, he could not practice for 4 weeks.
Yeah, that's a great point. Very wise people say never make a decision before you have to, and they're not having to do that yet. So